The Technical Advisory Committee meeting of December 8th. And we're going to start with item 11 on the agenda. And just to reference item 11 for everybody, there should be within attachment A to the agenda packet, shows the dates that we have tentatively scheduled for the TAC, starting with the meeting in Los Angeles on April 20th. We'll look at potentially a July 20th meeting if we decide a fourth TAC meeting is necessary. And then there'll be a September 7th meeting in San Diego and a November 16th meeting, 2018, in Sacramento. So, and again, I think it's important to say that the whole purpose of the Technical Advisory Committee, especially, again, I say this wishing that a lot of the people that were here this morning were all still here, is not to advocate for an immediate replacement of a traditional gas tax. We have Senate Bill 1, which is now in place, and that's going to provide a sufficient level of funding for the near future. But I think it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that the traditional gas tax long-term is completely unsustainable. And as the vehicle fleet overall moves to a much more efficient platform, and you see more zero-emission vehicles being purchased, gas tax revenues are going to continue to diminish. And as you saw earlier, we know other states are looking at the road charge as a method to collect transportation revenues. The federal government is looking at this. And so, of course, it's important that California be on the forefront. So that being said, in 2018, the TAC is going to kind of shift its focus now to what the state of California might be prepared as we might look as a transition to a road charge. And, probably in my mind, one of the most logical things to think of in the beginning is to talk about phasing in a road charge by looking at zero-emission vehicles and certainly autonomous vehicles and possibly commercial vehicles to be in some of those first groups. We've already heard companies like Lyft and Uber have said they want to pay by the mile. They have bought into the idea of paying by the mile. It makes sense to them. They've got the technology on board. The idea of autonomous vehicles paying by the mile is because nobody owns one right now. And it makes sense that if we're going to start with that platform of autonomous vehicles hitting the streets, again, not to disenfranchise those people, especially that we heard earlier today speak, who could continue to pay at the gas pump if they want. But autonomous vehicles perhaps might be a method to where this program could get started, because it's obviously going to be a long period of time to transition in. So with that, Garth is going to kind of go over the TAC meeting dates that I mentioned, some of the areas we should focus on. And then following Garth's comments, I'm going to seek the tax approval for our meeting calendar, our focus areas for 2018. So with that, Garth Hopkins.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. Members, good afternoon. And just kind of wanted to go over attachment B with you on this particular item on tab 11. Kind of looking strategically, looking out into the future, into 2018, a whole 12 months from now. But like the Chair had mentioned, we do have a tentatively scheduled a meeting in April. And what we're looking at per your approval is to look at, kind of the road charge and administration. How would a road charge within California be administered and also enforced if we were to go with a possible road charge? How would the revenue be collected in lieu of the gas tax? And then lastly, just like the Chair mentioned, we're looking at the AVs, the autonomous vehicles, and also the ZEVs, the zero-emission vehicles as well. But potentially another part of the overall fleet that we could look to phase in possibly would be the commercial vehicle fleet. And so, we'll have some discussions in April about that particular phasing in of a commercial vehicle fleet. Moving to September, we're going to start looking at how, what recommendations the TAC will be coming up with to include in that for the CTC's, the California Transportation Commission's annual report. And so we'll be kind of doing a summary of what we're going to be hearing about today, the ZEVs, the AVs, commercial, the revenue collection, administration enforcement, kind of going over those recommendations and discussing them a little bit more in detail in September. Also, we'll get an update from Caltrans, as we heard earlier this morning. You know, some of the research that they're going to be doing in this particular area, so we'll get an update from them. And then moving to November, again, we'll be looking at finalizing, kind of honing the recommendations that we have for our annual report for the CTC's annual report. And then lastly, kind of doing some strategic planning for looking past, into calendar year 2019. Where are we at from a road charge perspective, and particularly from the TAC perspective. So we'll have some discussions on that. So in a nutshell, that's kind of looking out over the 3 scheduled meetings we have. Like the chair mentioned, if it looks like the TAC members wanted to, if we needed a 4th meeting, we could do that in July or at some other date is with the TAC's pleasure. With that, that's all I have.
Any questions or comments on that? Any disagreement? Any alternatives? Sounds good. All right, well then I would entertain a motion that we would adopt the schedule for 2018. Okay, we have a motion from O'Connor, second from Ornelas. Any discussions? Hearing none. All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right, that passes. Thank you very much. We'll now go to item number 12 on the agenda, which is an overview of the Governor's Zero Emission Vehicle Action Plan and discussion of road charge as a method of collection. And so, as we've heard earlier, beginning with the 2020 model year, zero emission vehicles are going to start paying a $100 a year fee in lieu of the gas tax. Obviously that's a step in the right direction, but we need to have a structure in place that captures the true cost of maintaining local streets, roads, and highways that EVs are sharing with other vehicles as well. And so we've got Taylor Jones is here from the Governor's Office of Business Economic Development, which is GoBiz, and Alan Jen from UC Davis Institute of Transportation Studies, ITS. And I think Josh Cunningham, Josh
Correct.
Is here from ARB as well. So we thank you very much for being here. And with that, I turn it over to you, Garth, to kind of get this
You
going.
did a fantastic job, Chair. Thank you very much. With that, I just really wanted to turn it over to Taylor and have her give us an overview of the ZEV, the Zero Emission Vehicle Action Plan that they've gone through a couple iterations. And Taylor?
Yes, hi.
Come on up.
Do you want to
to
do
the
it at the podium, please?
And I believe hopefully your PowerPoint's all queued up. Thank you.
Is it live? No? Let's see, what do we need to do? We just need to give you lots of time, I think. There you go.
Great. Can you see the slides?
Yeah. Oh,
No.
Gino will get them up. There we go.
Great.
All right, Taylor.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Taylor Jones. I am the Policy Manager for Zero Emission Vehicle Infrastructure at the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, also known as GoBiz. The core of GoBiz is about bringing jobs to California. Zero emission vehicles are a part of that, and this is where the Governor's team that works on policy development for zero emission vehicles is housed these days. So I'm happy to provide a quick overview of the ZEV market. The main focus of this presentation, though, will be on the Governor's Zero Emission Vehicle Action Plan to give you an idea of what's been going on and how we might have resources to help inform this process. So first of all, we always like to start with, we all know why we're here. California has made great improvements in air quality, but we still have areas that are have some of the worst air quality in the nation. So we're here for air quality. Zero emission vehicles contribute to that solution. And we're also here for climate change. Zero emission vehicles are the biggest, transportation is the biggest source of emissions in the state of California. And the governor has set a vision to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 40% by 2030. Vehicles, as you can see on the slide, is one of the 6 pillars of our climate change strategies to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. And just like any good policy area, we have goals and targets. Our 2 main targets are first, 1.5 million zero-emission vehicles on California roads by 2025. That goal was set in the governor's 2012 executive order. And the second goal is a newer goal that was part of California's commitment at the Paris climate talks, which is that all passenger vehicles, new sales will be ZEV, zero emission, by 2050. So those are our goals, and I want to emphasize that behind those goals, there are many different stakeholders working together. It's not just government. Just a quick list of the ones that come to mind. We have local authorities with jurisdiction, local communities, we have fleets, automakers, station developers, utilities, and most importantly, people and drivers. And government is just one piece of that process. So to shine the focus on government for a moment, that brings us to the ZEV Action Plan. So the ZEV Action Plan is the government's commitment to accelerate growth in the ZEV market. It outlines a variety of different steps that agencies commit to take to grow the ZEV market in California, and it really has three main purposes. The first purpose is to be transparent. As government, we're laying it on the table. This document has stakeholder input, and we're showing this is our commitment from the government side of that stakeholder slide. This is what government plans to do. The second objective is to increase interagency collaboration. Each action in the plan has a lead agency that's responsible for completing the action and also a supporting agency. So we're really looking at identifying actions that agencies can partner together to use resources more efficiently and commit to growing the ZEV market together. And the third objective is to think big. California is in a lot of ways the leader in this space, and we're pushing agencies and departments to think about how they can creatively partner to move this market together. So we hope to have some creative actions that we test out in this plan that other jurisdictions might be able to follow. So the first Governor's Action Plan was created in 2013. Some big differences between the 2013 plan and the 2016 plan. The first being that the 2013 plan only included light-duty passenger cars. We had a very strong focus after the executive order to focus on passenger vehicles. This plan includes light-duty, of course, but in addition, it includes medium, heavy-duty, and freight. So all of the actions are focused on pretty much every type of zero-emission vehicle, including public transit. So that was a big change in this plan. The second big change is there's a focus throughout the plan, kind of woven through all of the actions, to increase access to zero-emission technology for all Californians. So it includes making, the passenger vehicles cheaper, but also expanding options for transit and other forms of zero-emission technology that we have in our world today. So what's in the action plan? I'll briefly run through the 6 sections. I will warn you that there are more than 200 actions in the ZEV Action Plan that agencies commit to, but they're all categorized around these 6 strategies. The first strategy is to maintain consumer awareness of ZEV options and benefits. This section is all about getting the word out so that consumers know that the cars are here and that it can be an option for them. Underlying this first strategy section is one of California's landmark policies, the ZEV mandate. The ZEV mandate, administered by the Air Resources Board, requires that a certain number of vehicles in California be zero emission. And that's first and most importantly, the reason that we're seeing more and more ZEV models out on the road today. Also, in this section, we call for, the government together calls for a broad consumer awareness campaign. The reality today is that ZEVs have been on the road for years now, but a lot of consumers still don't know about them, and if they do, they don't think it's an option for them. And they also don't know about some of our rebates and state programs. So this section is really all about bringing that consumer awareness to drivers in California. The second section is make ZEVs an affordable and attractive option for drivers. This section includes actions around the rebates. California continues to provide sizable rebates for zero-emission vehicles. We provide $5,000 for a hydrogen electric car, $2,500 for a pure battery electric car, and $1,500 for a plug-in hybrid car. And this section is about bringing down the purchase price for ZEVs and also providing options that are attractive for drivers, like extending the HOV lane stickers as an example. And I want to pause there for a moment because this was also a big change from our thinking in 2013 to our thinking today, which is separating these two concepts. In 2013, a consumer awareness action could be considered having a rebate program. But what we've wanted to focus on in this plan is having a rebate program and having a rebate program that everyone knows about are two very, very different things. So we're really trying to push government, not necessarily to market, but to be streamlined in our communications and help get the word out as most effectively as we can. Section 3 is about infrastructure, all about infrastructure. We've seen so far a great evolution of infrastructure funding in California. Years ago, we were funding chargers in single-family homes. Now we're funding chargers on highways and in public places to increase the range and usability of zero-emission vehicles. We also, just 2 years ago, did not have any commercial hydrogen stations in California, and now we have 31 that are open to the public. So we've seen big changes in infrastructure, but I think that everyone can agree that the bottom line is we need more. I saw a survey recently that said approximately 70% of Californians have still never seen a charging station. And they're smaller, they look different than gas stations, so you might not notice them, but there are a lot in California and growing, so it's really on all of us and that whole stakeholder community to make sure that everyone realizes where charging stations are and that they can be an option to fuel their car. Section 4 is primarily led by our office, GoBiz, and it's about maximizing job and economic opportunities from ZEVs. We look at two main things in this section of the plan. The first is workforce needs, figuring out how we can help support the workforce of the future that might work on zero-emission vehicles and that whole pipeline, and how we might be able to kind of cross-pollinate with other technologically advanced industries that are growing today. And then the second part of that section is about supply chain, making sure that we fully understand the supply chain and understand how we can support all pieces of that supply chain growing here at home in California. The fifth section of the plan is something that the governor has been very vocal about recently in his broader climate mission, which is growing ZEV adoption outside of California and helping in any way that we can. California is part of the International ZEV Alliance, which is a group of jurisdictions from around the world that are committing to similar goals around zero-emission vehicles. And a very tangible action in this section that we recently completed was information sharing with the state of New York. New York just opened their vehicle rebate program, and we learned a lot from them. They learned a lot from us, and I think their rebate program is starting in a much better place than California's did years ago. So that's a great example of how we try to bolster and support other states to grow their zero-emission vehicle markets, because at the end of the day, it needs to be all of us together. And then the sixth section in the plan might be my favorite section of the plan because I think it's the section that we as state government have the most control over, and it's leading by example. And in this section, we took the opportunity with the release of this plan to accelerate our own state's fleet goals to incorporate zero-emission vehicles into our state operations. We had an original goal of 10% of new car purchases by the state would be zero-emission by 2015. We're proud to say that we exceeded that goal at around 12%, and purchasing for the 16-17 fiscal year was up to around 20%. So we're making really good progress, and because of that, in this section of the plan, we doubled down as a state to say that by 2025, 50% of our purchases will be zero-emission vehicles in the state fleet. And that's really exciting for us because it was the ability to double down on the goal was based on really solid fleet projections from our Department of General Services saying that this is working and we can do this. So that was very exciting for us. And then, of course, the complementary part of that section of the plan is making sure that we have the right infrastructure. So we also set a goal that 5% of all state parking spaces will have charging by 2020. So we're working on that. That's a little bit more difficult, of course, because every facility is different, every site is different. We're learning a lot from our own installations at the state about what we can share with outside stakeholders for working with outside funding opportunities like the utility programs and also internal funding options at the state of California. So that section we're very proud of, and we've seen great progress. So that is a snapshot of what government's doing. I should mention that there are over 25 agencies that collaborate on this action plan. So some agencies, like the Office of the State Fire Marshal, has a smaller role where they're helping to train local first responders about electric vehicles and hydrogen. Other agencies, like the Air Resources Board, have a third of the actions in the plan because they're responsible for a lot of our vehicle work. But I think what we've seen is that we created a second edition of this plan because the first plan was working really well, and agencies like to have that sort of, line-by-line accountability and to-do list that they can rely on to get things done, and stakeholders like the transparency. So all of that work is behind the scenes and for government, and I wanted to give you a quick update on the market status. It's fun to update the slide because it changes so frequently. We have close to 350,000 zero-emission vehicles on the road in California today, 549 DC fast charging stations for public use, 31 hydrogen stations, and as I mentioned, 2 years ago, 2.5, we didn't have any. So that's been a big change, and our office has helped with the local permitting and process to get that station growth going. And now you can drive from San Diego up through Los Angeles. There's a station on I-5 at Harris Ranch. You can drive through San Francisco and up to Lake Tahoe in a fuel cell electric vehicle. So we have a lot of the main parts of the state unlocked, and we're on the path to 100 stations for hydrogen. And then lastly, we have 3,600 approximately level 2 charging stations. And these are all public stations. We don't count stations that are at workplaces or in homes, but that's also a growing market for options for the public to charge. So that's a quick overview of what's happening. I know it was very fast. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I think that, what I would like to leave you with is a couple things. The first being that there has been a lot of progress. We've seen it. It's tangible. I was visiting the LA Auto Show last week, and their plug-in hybrid SUVs expected to come out in 2018, which is a great surprise and a great advancement for everyone. But in the reality, we're still straddling this market of early adopters in the mass market, and it's still very, very early in the market, and there's a lot of growth that still needs to happen. So I would just leave you with that to inform your decisions here, and also know that there is a large group of agencies willing to help and provide any information you need through your process.
Thank you, Taylor,
Thank
very
you.
much. Any questions or comments for Taylor? Pam? There you go.
Hi, and just want to let you know, I'm from the city of Santa Monica, and our council just recently adopted an electric vehicle action plan.
Great.
And our goal there is to expand our public charging infrastructure over the next 5 years from 75 to 300. And also in a city where we have a lot of multifamily housing, and to be able to, make gains in that type of housing, and to increase EV ownership from 3% to 15% by 2025. So
That's great.
Yeah, so at the local government level too, we're following up and we're setting our goals, and we're going to be aggressive about trying to reach those.
It's great, and I one anecdote of recent is that Sacramento is planning to install DC fast chargers at a local park, and I had a couple of my friends that live nearby send me a message saying now I can get an electric vehicle because we all live in apartments downtown. So I think DC fast charging is a great option for apartment dwellers and multifamily housing.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, Terry.
How many, yeah, I'm on. How many manufacturers of ZEVs are there? I mean, available for purchase by the, general public?
Yeah, so almost every major automaker has a version of a ZEV today. We have, I think it's the latest count is 41 total models available.
Where some are mixed hybrid?
Some are mixed, yeah. Some are pure battery electric, some are hydrogen, and some are mixed plug-in hybrid.
And there's a hydrogen charging station that went right on my corner in Los Angeles on the corner of 83rd and Lincoln Boulevard.
Oh yeah, great.
Very cool. Thank you. Mayor?
I had a question. Taylor, I just wondered if we could get a copy of this.
Yes.
To be able to share with our COG.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a link to the action plan on one of the slides. Like I mentioned, it's a large document, but I think that our summaries of each section are pretty good. So hopefully that helps too.
And also, on the Road Charge website, we usually post all the PowerPoints and everything, so this will be
Okay,
on
that's
there as
good
well.
to know. Yeah.
Yep. Any other questions or comments for Taylor? All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Why don't we ask, let's see, are we going to have Josh? Is Josh going to
Yeah,
speak?
Joshua, how about if we have the state agency from ARB? We were fortunate to get Joshua Cunningham from the Air Resources Board here kind of last minute, but ARB is doing so much important work and a lot of work in this area. We thought it'd be really valuable to get their input, and so that's why we were able to invite Joshua down from the Air Resources Board. So with that, Joshua?
Good. Thank you, Garth. Good afternoon. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak here. And I just want to follow up a bit on what Taylor Jones is talking through at the state administration level. I guess the first and foremost message I want to convey is that the Air Resources Board is eager to enhance and do more to partner with the Transportation Commission as we look at alternative transportation funding mechanisms. A lot of the programs that we oversee are implementing more efficient, lower GHG emission vehicles and electric vehicles to try and push the fleet technology to really reduce the emission levels for the greenhouse gas and criteria emission policies. But we obviously recognize that that's going to reduce fuel consumption in a very large way, and so we need to find some alternative for road funding. So we look forward to the opportunity to work closer with the CTC staff. A broad message that I've already heard you mention today, which I think is valuable, is that the EV flat fee coming in place in 2020 is an important step forward. All alternative fuel vehicles are going to have to pay into the system in some way. But I'm glad to hear that you're exploring mechanisms that would make that a more variable, a more robust policy instead of just a flat fee long term. As the gasoline vehicles become more efficient, their taxation is going to go down. A flat fee would not capture varying size vehicles and range vehicles, so I'm glad to hear that. But clearly, as Taylor mentioned, one of the goals that we're working towards is to meeting the 1.5 million EVs in California by 2025, which is a relatively small portion of the fleet. That would represent only about 5% of the cars on the road by 2025, so a small portion of the gasoline diesel taxation offset. But long term, we are looking to try and implement rules, regulations, and other policies to get to the 100% sales level that Taylor mentioned, or more aggressive than that, as we've heard some of the targets mentioned. So if you're getting to do 100% sales by 2050, that means 2/3 of all cars on the road by 2050 will be some form of an EV. And obviously that has a very large effect on gasoline consumption. So with that context, I'll just briefly mention some of the programs that we are implementing. My group is the one that develops the regulations and implements the rules for new vehicle requirements. That includes our greenhouse gas vehicle requirements, our tailpipe standards for criteria ozone emissions, and our electric vehicle requirements. And as you can imagine, one of the big battles we're fighting right now is to make sure we maintain that authority with the federal EPA to keep those rules strong. California is not willing to back down on those programs because they're such a large chunk of our GHG emission inventory. But we're already starting to look forward past 2025. So those rules max out in their stringency in 2025, and so we're starting to explore what future regulations would need to be put in place to help, at a minimum, get to the new SB 32 statutory requirements. And that will require a very large chunk in EVs. I work closely with our teams that do sustainable community strategies. You've heard a little bit about that today. A lot of that has direct relevance to what you're talking about here, as well as our alternative fuel infrastructure rollout programs. I guess the last thing I'll just close on is that we have a pretty close relationship with the automakers because we regulate them, so we have a lot of dialogue with them. We understand where their technology is going on the powertrain front, but we do have the opportunity to learn a little bit about what they're doing with vehicle telematics. So where that has some relevance to programs that you might be talking about, pay at the pump and other systems, that might be an opportunity for partnership with your staff. And then on the next agenda item, I'm pleased to see you're talking about autonomous vehicles and ride-hailing applications. Certainly when you're talking about those technologies in fleets, that seems to be a very obvious place to start implementing some pricing mechanisms. So with that, I'll conclude my thoughts and welcome any questions.
Yeah, I will just thank you very much for being here. And clearly, it's important that we do have this discussion, Joshua, between ARB and the Commission and Caltrans staff that's working on the TAC, because after concluding the 9-month pilot, and I think we even heard that this morning in some of the comments from the public, there's little interest in a lot of gizmos and gadgets, and if it's already included in the vehicle, that might make the most sense. The public isn't interested in doing anything different than what they are right now. They want to pull up to the pump, put $5 on the pump number, and get the heck out on their way, as long as they're continuing to pump gas. So the technology, to me, is going to be really the only way that makes the most sense, except for those from the privacy world and others that are interested in those other mechanisms, and we need to respect that and continue to allow those as well. But for the overwhelming majority, as we saw in the pilot, they liked having the Fitbit for their car, basically, where they could get updates about their car. And I would just encourage you to work with the Caltrans staff and the Commission staff as we look towards, discussions we've had with Mary Nichols and others were along those lines, embedding that technology, much the same way ARB mandated the OBD2 port back when it did. I think it's a lot easier to do it that way as opposed to trying to do something that's legislative or otherwise. It needs to be coming right from you guys. So,
yeah, seamless to the consumer.
Exactly. So we'll talk more on that as we go. And thank you again. Any other questions or comments from members of the TAC?
Okay.
Josh, thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for being here. Very much appreciate it. Brady, do you want to make the next introduction?
Well, and next we have Alan Jen from UC Davis, the Institute of Transportation Studies. We're able to invite him down here today to brief the TAC members on the study that was mandated in SB1, and it's something that, from a staff perspective, I think we should closely monitor throughout its work. So with that, Alan?
Welcome, Alan.
Thank you, and thanks to the committee for inviting me to speak this afternoon. So I'm Alan Jen. I'm a researcher at the Institute of Transportation Studies, as was mentioned. So we've been talking about this part of the SB1 $100 annual registration fee for electric vehicles starting in 2020. There's an additional section 48 in SB1 that requires UC Davis to conduct a study specifically looking at this fee in the context of adoption of electric vehicles for meeting clean air and climate targets, but at the same time acknowledging that they need to pay their fair share of the road. To provide some perspective on this, California will be the 20th state now to implement a electric vehicle registration fee. And so we are devising a general work plan with two main focuses. First, looking at the impacts of having this registration fee, so namely how it will affect funding for transportation infrastructure and how it may affect adoption of electric vehicles in the coming years. The second focus is to look at alternative mechanisms for funding. And these include things such as an electricity fee or an energy equivalence fee, and of course, road charge fee alternative. And so the study is going to be done actually in collaboration with UCLA, and Professor Marty Wax, who's on the committee, will be leading the UCLA efforts. Part of Section 48 in SB1 has requirement for us to consult with a number of agencies, including ARB, DOT, DMV, and the State Board of Equalization. But we've already been approached by a number of stakeholders throughout the state. And so we're planning to convene an advisory panel to help consult and provide feedback on the study. And so if anyone is sort of interested, we think that there's a lot of expertise that sort of lines up, and so feel free to contact me about that. We're hoping to convene the first meeting early next year. And so that's basically a short summary of what we're going to be doing with the study, and it's starting to undergo way right now. And so if anyone has any questions about that, I'd be happy to take them.
Any questions for Alan? Well, very much appreciate what you're doing and being cognizant of what this is all about too, and how that ties into autonomous vehicles going forward.
Yes, I think that the road charge funding mechanism will play a pretty important role in this study, and so it'll be good to coordinate with this committee and other experts on this topic.
We'll make you a regular part of our agenda.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you very much, Alan, for being here. Any other questions or comments? All right. I know Mitch Weiss is going to come up here because Miss Branson has got to catch a plane. So,
Okay.
Yep, we'll be talking soon. So let's go to item number 13 on the agenda. And speaking of autonomous vehicles, this is going to be an overview of how road charge might be a method of collection. And so we hear about autonomous vehicles all the time. They're getting a lot of publicity. And as I mentioned earlier, they're going to be moving from kind of the testing stage to the implementation stage in the near future. And given the fact that they're loaded with already a bunch of technology, the telematics, it might make sense that we would use an AV vehicle, that system, to be based on road charge as a replacement to the gas tax. So those vehicles from the beginning could actually be paying by the mile. So I want to thank Stephanie Doherty, who's here today from CalStat, the California State Transportation Agency, to kind of provide us an overview on what California is doing at developing AV regulations. So thank you, Stephanie, for being here.
Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share some information around the work that's been happening over the last few years in California as it relates to the regulation of autonomous vehicles. want to start off by just giving you a little bit of history. Legislation passed back in 2012 requires the Department of Motor Vehicles to adopt regulations that establish requirements for manufacturer testing of autonomous vehicles on California public roads, as well as the public use or operation of autonomous vehicles on California roadways. The legislation also included a California-specific definition of an autonomous vehicle. Namely, that's a vehicle that has the capability of operating without the active physical control or monitoring of a human operator. So for those of you who are familiar with the SAE levels, this equates to an SAE level 3, 4, or 5 vehicle. A vehicle that can either for a portion or the entirety of its trip operate without the intervention or supervision of a human driver. The legislation also was clear as to define what is not considered to be an autonomous vehicle in California, and that really correlates with the type of advanced driver assistance system features that you see out in vehicles today. So perhaps a lane keeping system, adaptive cruise control, blind spot detection and warning, etc. So in coming up with a strategy as to how to approach a regulation of autonomous vehicles, the Department of Motor Vehicles decided to break the regulatory work into two distinct packages. First, testing of autonomous vehicles on public roads, and then second, the public use. In 2014, in September of 2014 actually, the department adopted a testing regulation package that addresses testing of vehicles with a driver behind the wheel. And those regulations essentially set out a permitting process where manufacturers attest to the department that they've met a set of requirements and receive a permit to begin testing on public roads. This slide gives some examples of some of the requirements that a manufacturer must meet. So for example, they must have $5 million in financial responsibility. They're also required to have a test driver seated in the driver's seat during testing. And because those test drivers effectively act as a safety driver to monitor the safe operation of the test vehicle, also to be available to take over in the case of an emergency or unplanned circumstance, those test drivers have to be an employee, contractor, or designee of the manufacturer. They also need to have a clean driving record, and they also have to have completed a training program that's administered by the manufacturer. So that way they have a good sense of the type of system that's being developed, its current capabilities and limitations, and have that knowledge as they're out on the road. There are some ongoing reporting requirements built into the current testing regulations. A manufacturer must report a collision within 10 days of its occurrence to the Department of Motor Vehicles. And then on an annual basis, they provide a report to the department of unanticipated disengagements. So these are essentially instances in the testing process when there's an unplanned failure of the technology, or perhaps the test driver opts to take control of the test vehicle because they felt it was important for the safety of the vehicle or other road users. And right now, the testing permit is currently valid for 1 year. I think it's also important to note that these testing regulations right now are very much focused on passenger vehicles. So the regulations do exclude certain vehicle types from being eligible to receive a testing permit. That includes commercial vehicles, large vehicles with a gross vehicle weight over 10,000 pounds, motorcycles, a few other vehicle types as well. The department's thought was really that these vehicle types raise some unique safety and regulatory considerations, and that it really made sense to wait and develop a regulatory package for those vehicles second and subsequent, where there really can be some thoughtful examination of those policy and regulatory concerns. So as I said, the regulations have been in place since 2014. We're currently at 44 manufacturers approved to test, although I would say that number tends to change on a daily basis. And you can see from looking at this slide that it ranges from established automobile manufacturers to auto component suppliers to software companies, as well as startups and new entrants to the market. Collectively, these permit holders represent a little over 300 test vehicles and a little over 1,100 test drivers who are authorized to test in California. And now, so that's testing. We turn our attention to deployment. The department is currently in the process of a rulemaking to both allow for testing without a driver on public roads, as well as to allow the public use of autonomous vehicles. So that might mean purchase, lease, use of an autonomous vehicle as a transportation service, otherwise making that vehicle available outside of a testing program. The department initially released their proposed rulemaking for public comment in March of this year, had a very robust set of comments that came in during that 45-day public comment period, as well as the hearings. So subsequent to that, the department has released proposed notifications of additional modifications to the regs, 2 separate 15-day notices, one that came out in October of this year and one that was just released this past week. So since we are in an active rulemaking, can't necessarily go into too much detail in terms of the content of those regulations, but I would want to point out 2 things. One is that this regulatory package very much recognizes that responsibility for motor vehicle safety and equipment rests with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. So those regs are really trying to adhere to that traditional division of responsibilities where the federal government is responsible for vehicle safety and states are responsible for functions such as licensing drivers, registering vehicles, enacting and enforcing traffic laws. And the regulations do have several certifications that are associated with the vehicle's ability to safely operate on public roads. Those include a certification that the vehicles meet federal motor vehicle safety standards, and also that they are designed to comply with state and local traffic laws. So that rulemaking package is currently in process, and the department's target is to have that regulatory package completed next year, sorry. And with that, that's a broad brush overview of where we are on the regulatory process. I do think, like a lot of people in the room, probably we are very excited by the potential of autonomous vehicles to enhance roadway safety, to increase mobility, potentially achieve some environmental benefits. So it's very exciting to be part of this policy-making process for autonomous vehicles.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. Stephen?
Just a quick question. So what happens, so if next year you release the final regulations for AV use, what happens after that?
So at that point, when the regulations are in place, a manufacturer would be able to come to the department and to apply either to put a driverless test vehicle out or to actually make the vehicles available for public operations. So they would come, apply to the department, receive a deployment permit. That potentially gives them the discretion to roll out that technology in whatever way is appropriate for their business model. So it might be sale, it might be lease, it might be some type of an autonomous vehicle taxi service.
Okay, and then there's no automatic or necessary further regulatory or government action at that point for a while?
I think we're cognizant that anytime you're regulating an emerging technology, that there will be the need for periodic reviews, revisions of the regulations. So I definitely don't think we're looking at it as a check the box, we're done, let's move on to the next initiative. I think we anticipate that we will be doing that constant monitoring and potentially adjusting. And then we also do know that we'll want to pursue some regulatory activity, even starting conversations around regulation of commercial vehicles, since right now we're very much focused in the passenger vehicle arena.
Any other questions or comments? Lee?
So I'm also following AV regulation and legislation at the federal level. And so my first question for you is just curious how you feel or how you guys are seeing the preemption provisions in the federal legislation. I mean, I know that there were a number of municipalities that were especially, that I've talked to, that were especially concerned. They got some changes, but I'm curious, but I don't know very much about where the state of California per se has been weighing in on the scope of preemption. And, from my organization's standpoint, one of the really important parts of how you're going to regulate or oversee AVs is both in terms of the security of data transmissions, because there are going to be a lot of sort of hubbed communications for upgrading and patching problems, since it's all going to be a sort of a giant beta test for a while. And then second, from a privacy perspective, since all of the data that is collected by an AV for operational purposes is also an enormous amount of data about both the world and about the people, and which companies will have a very strong incentive to monetize, and law enforcement will have a strong incentive to gather for use for all sorts of unrelated purposes. So I was just wondering, how do you see sort of the disparate roles of the states and the Congress in this area, and also even the municipalities, because I know that the smart cities people that I talk to are also really, they want that data. I don't want them to have it, but they want that data, so.
Yeah, we're certainly aware and tracking the legislation that's occurring in the federal level as it relates to preemption. Don't necessarily have an official position at that time, but it is something that we are, of course, continuing to monitor and evaluate how that might change our regulatory approach moving forward should action occur at the federal level. I think within the DMV and its regulatory process, there's been certainly consideration to the privacy and security issues that are raised with autonomous vehicles. Built into the regulations themselves are certain provisions and requirements around disclosing to owners, passengers, what information vehicles are collecting that's not necessary for the safe operation of the vehicle, and certainly either requiring that disclosure and in deployment, even an informed consent where someone would need to opt in to having that information collected. That's what's being contemplated, either an opt-in or anonymizing the information so it's not capable of being tracked back to an individual owner-operator.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Thank you so much for being here. Again, appreciate it. We're going to do what we can to see how we connect autonomous and road charge. It might be some potential legislation coming up. Thank you. Thank you. All right. With that, then, something was brought to my attention a little bit ago, thanks to the watchful eye of one of our members. We voted earlier on item 11. Item 11 was the agenda or the schedule for 2018, and there apparently was a clerical error in the dates. The April 20th meeting should say San Diego, and the September 7th meeting should say Los Angeles. If you go to tab 16, which really just is our adjournment, it shows the April 20th meeting is San Diego. We've checked, it's really San Diego. So I don't remember who the maker of the motion was for item 11, but whoever that was, do you have that, Ann? And Mayor Ellis was the seconder? All right, so we'll go ahead and just ask that we revote. Is there any objection to revoting on item 11? All right, hearing none. Ms. O'Connor, do you want to just restate the motion then?
Right, the motion is to approve the road charge meeting dates for 2018, which would be April 20th in San Diego, a tentative meeting July 20th, if needed, to be determined, September 7th in Los Angeles, and November 16th in Sacramento.
All right, it's motion. And we have a second from Susan. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, that passes. We've got that corrected. Thank you very much, Supervisor, for pointing that out. All right, why don't we go to Garth on item 14, which just kind of reviews any of the action items from today.
Sure. First of all, staff apologizes for that mix-up on the dates and the locations. In terms of action items that I was able to get during the course of the meeting today is we will send out a copy, a link to the governor's ZEV Action Plan to each of the staff members or each of the TAC members, just to make sure it will be in the minutes and whatnot, but just to make sure that you all have a copy of that. And also, in terms of, it's more an action item for staff, but we will make sure that we ensure to monitor what UC Davis Institute of Transportation Studies is doing in terms of their workload on that ZEV study, and then also ensure that coordination, we have continued coordination with ARB, DMV, and other state agencies who play a role or may have some, relation to what this member, this TAC body is doing. And with that, I mean, those are the action items that, unless someone else had some other action items. Ann, did you have anything? Okay.
Anything else from members of the committee? All right.
I have something.
Carrie does.
Carrie.
So on the dais, you should have received a summary report as well as a brochure for our final report. We do not have a hard copy yet of the larger report, and actually the summary that we have is one that we just printed off internally. So we'll be mass producing them, make sure that I send copies out to all of you. If you have a need or you're going to be making a presentation, certainly, contact Garth, and we can work with Garth in putting together materials for you. We have talking points that are available if you get any press requests. Also, if you need extra copies of things, please, let Garth know, and he can work through me, and we can make sure that you get what you need.
Okay, very good. All right, our second to last item on the agenda, back to public comment. We have one more slip, and that would be from Roy Bleckert. I believe I pronounced that right. Roy, please come on up. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. I heard think big. I'd like to take you back to California pre-1990, when we were #1 economically, quality of life, education, and more importantly, transportation. Now we are down in the 40s or 50s or probably even working lower for that. And it's precisely from the government agencies and boards like this. As I heard from the lady say, oh, well, we're going to take all these fees and shove them in there, and then we're going to put them all into one fee so it's a smooth transition. No. SB 1, cap and tracks and track and tax, is designed to raise the taxes up. We got a dollar a gallon now charge more on gas or whatever the prices are. You're going to systematically screw the people into the ground. You're going to charge them more, as we have done for 3 decades, for less services. You're going to clog their roads, make their quality of life less every day. And I hope you're really proud of what you're doing on this board and what our government is doing. Because it's not about what you want, it's what is best for everybody. And this is the United States, the freest country that has ever been in the history of the earth. And it was built on free market principles and you getting to choose what you want to do and not have government intrude on your quality of life, and especially not have government trample on you. And that's what's happened too far, and you can see the results. Since the mid-1990s, we have had net migration out of California to the 49 states. In 150 years prior, that never happened. You have to look at what you're doing, because I said at the World Logistics Center hearings, when that project came up, I said the biggest part of pollution is idling cars and trucks. And the South Coast Air Quality Management came up to me afterwards and said, you're exactly right. You're not attacking what the problem is, you're making the problem worse. And that's why California is declining against the rest of the nation. That's why residents of California are leaving. They're not leaving because the weather's bad. They're not leaving because we don't have beautiful terrain. They're leaving because of government policies. Every day, businesses are leaving. You're taking away the incentive that makes things great, and that's the free market. And if we are to have the pursuit of happiness, that's where we have to go. And we have to have government representatives and boards that are working for the people and not against them.
Thank you, Roy, for your comments. We have no other slips. Was there any other public comment? All right, hearing none. The last item on our agenda is the adjournment, and that shows that our next meeting will be on April 20th, 2018 in San Diego. The meeting will be held at the District 11 offices for Caltrans. Let's say to the committee members, thank you so much for being here today. If you have any questions or issues regarding the TAC or any other road charge issues, to give Garth Hopkins a call. And again, I just want to thank the public for being here today and the good comments that we had. And at this point, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.